Hi, boys and girls. Our math class is looking very different this week. So I am coming to you in a video to talk about our new skill, and then you're going to continue to have the chance to practice in Class Kick. So this week, our new skill is talking about decimals. There are 3 levels to being able to read, write, and identify decimals. We're starting at level 1 and just going to look at the tenths place. Before we do that, though, I want to take just a moment to review our mixed number and improper fractions, okay? We were going to practice that again last week, and you had to use that practice in Class Kick, but I felt like another explanation may be helpful. So let's just look first at what we see in the picture. I see a total of 4 circles. Some of them are completely shaded in. One is not. Looks like they're all split into 3 pieces, so that's important to notice. So if we just look at the mixed number first, then we want to think about a mixture of a whole number and a fraction. So we want to find all of the shapes that are completely filled in. That's your whole number. Those first 3 circles are completely shaded purple. So that's our whole number. There are 3 whole circles filled in. That last circle, there's only 1 part shaded. So that means that last circle needs to be written as a fraction. So there's 1 part shaded out of 3 parts altogether in that last circle. So our mixed number is 3 1/3. 3 whole circles and 1/3 of another one. But if we were to look at the same picture and make it as an improper fraction, this is how that would go. Now, keep in mind, an improper fraction is when that top number, our numerator, is bigger than our bottom number. An improper fraction is not a mixture of a whole number and a fraction, although it's going to mean the same thing. So what we need to look at is each circle is split into 3 pieces, right? When we're doing our fraction, that bottom number tells me how many pieces each shape is split into. So that first circle has 3 pieces, the second circle has 3 pieces, the third circle has 3 pieces, and the fourth circle has 3 pieces. They're all 1/3 pieces. So that's how we know the 3 or the thirds goes on the bottom. Now we just need to count how many 1/3 pieces are there. There's 3 in the first one, 3 in the second one, so now we have a total of 6 1/3 pieces, 3 in the third one, so now we have a total of 9 1/3 pieces, and then we have 1 more in that last one, so that gives us 10 1/3 pieces are shaded. So that makes our improper fraction 10 thirds. Okay, but now it's time to segue into our decimal lesson. So here you see a place value chart, very similar to the one that we have used in the past, except for you'll notice it only goes up to the thousands place. And I know that you know how to read numbers through millions, but for the sake of our decimal practice, we're just going to have one that goes up to the thousands place. But what's really important is as you track from the thousands down, we have thousands, hundreds, tens, ones, and then you're going to see that black dot. That's your decimal. And then after your decimal, you're going to see tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Notice that each one of those words has a THS at the end. That's super duper important because when you see a THS at the end, that will signal a decimal or a part of a number. So now oftentimes you will see base 10 blocks to represent decimals, and they may look very similar to base 10 blocks that we've used before. And so in that case, there always needs to be some directions to let you know what the whole unit is representing. Now in this case, we have a box that's split into 10 pieces, right? Those are your decimals. Those are your tenths. Okay, there's 10 of them. If all of them were filled in, that would be the whole thing, right? So now we have this split into 10 equal parts. If you look at the picture to the right, that bottom 10th is shaded blue. That means 1/10 is shaded. So when you think about what 1/10 looks like, if you look at your place value chart, you have 0 ones, so 0 whole numbers, and then 1/10. So the decimal separates the ones place and the tenths place. So this is how it would be represented, 0.1. Okay, let's take a look at this one that is lightly shaded, but if you look closely, there are 4 pieces shaded very light bluish. Okay, there's 10 pieces altogether. So that means there are 4/10 shaded. Since there's 10 pieces, that means each one of them is a tenth. So there are 4/10 shaded. So we represent that with 0 whole numbers, decimal, 4/10. Look at the place value chart. 0 in the ones place, and then comes the decimal, always, 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 and then 4 in the tenths place. This one is viewed the same exact way. This shape is split into tenths. There are 3 of them shaded. So that means we have 3/10 shaded. And that's represented with 0 ones, decimal, 3 in the tenths place. Now let's look at reading decimals and make sure that when we see one, we understand how to read it. So you can see that I have 0.2. If you put it in that place value chart like I have done, you see that the 2 is right after the decimal, and any number that's right after the decimal is always in the tenths place. So that means it's 2/10. Also, when you're looking at that written word, it's got the THS, right? So that signals a decimal also. But we read this 2/10. But we could also read it as 0 and 2/10. That little word "and" is super important because that's what you use in place of the decimal. 0 and 2/10. So there's 0 ones and 2/10. But you might have something in the ones place like this number. There's 3.7. If we were to read that, we read the whole number first, 3. When we get to the decimal, we say the word "and." So 3 and then we have 7. But we don't just stop at 7. We have to make sure we're recognizing what place 7 is in. And any place right after the decimal is the tenths place. So 3 and 7/10. 3 and 7/10. Going backwards is just as important. So we have practiced looking and reading at the written word for whole numbers and then writing it in standard form. Doing the same thing for decimals is important. Looking for key words. This reads 8/10. The tenths has a THS, so you know there has to be a decimal. The tenths place comes right after the decimal. So this would be represented with 0 ones, decimal, 8. So 8/10. The same way would be written for 2/10. That keyword tenths, because of the THS, tells you it's the number right after the decimal. So using that place value chart can be helpful. You have 0, and then you have your decimal, and then you have your 2 in your tenths place. So that means it is 2/10. This one, written in word form, shows a whole number, 3, and then there's that keyword "and." When you see that word "and," you automatically want to write your decimal, okay? So you have 3 and 8/10. So when you do this, it's going to be written as 3.8. 3 and 8/10. tenths. So taking the word form and writing the standard form for decimals. The last thing I want to show you is how to represent a decimal. So here we have a figure that is split into tenths. All of the pieces are evenly spaced out, and the directions are asking you to shade the figure to represent 0 and 7 tenths. So if you were to do that, then you would shade in 7 of them to represent 0 and 7 tenths. 7 1/10 pieces have been shaded in to represent 0 and 7 tenths. So in your practice today, you're going to have an opportunity to shade in so that you can represent a decimal. So let's review, because we have practiced reading decimals, writing decimals, and representing decimals just through the tenths place. The tenths place is that place right after your decimal. Okay, so now you're going to have an opportunity to practice this at your own pace. I want you to remember that you want to do this as independently as possible. Your learning coach should absolutely be there for your support and guidance, but you being able to work through this on your own is really going to have you working towards mastery. So you have some practice for decimals, and then you will have the review section as usual, which gives you the opportunity to practice everything we've already worked with, which is place value, rounding, comparing numbers.